America has spent centuries telling the world it is a serious republic built on law, dignity, and responsible leadership. Cute story. Because behind the marble monuments and patriotic speeches, U.S. politics also gave us canes in Congress, drunk inaugurations, cursed cheese, bathtub rumors, bathroom briefings, and elected officials behaving like history's most expensive improv troupe. These are 32 times U.S. politicians embarrassed the entire country. 1. In 1856, Senator Charles Sumner gave a furious anti-slavery speech that made Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina so angry he apparently forgot the United States government was supposed to have debates, not boss fights. Brooks did not answer with a speech. He did not request the floor. He did not even attempt the world's saddest little parliamentary comeback. He walked into the Senate chamber and beat Sumner with a cane until Sumner was bloody, collapsed, and seriously injured. This was not politics getting heated. This was a sitting congressman turning the Senate into a public assault scene. The attack became one of the ugliest warnings that America was cracking apart before the Civil War. For the rest of the world, it was a truly inspiring message. The Republic of Laws was working beautifully, as long as nobody within arm's reach owned a walking stick. 2. In 1786, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams visited Shakespeare's birthplace in England and behaved like the exact kind of tourists every historic site secretly trains for. These were future presidents, philosophers, men of reason, very serious Whigs with opinions. And what did they do when they saw Shakespeare's chair? They chipped off a piece of it with a knife as a souvenir. Not bought a postcard. Not wrote a reflective journal entry. They physically attacked literary furniture. Even better, this was apparently not treated as completely shocking because visitors had been doing similar souvenir vandalism for years, which somehow makes the whole thing more ridiculous. America loves picturing its founders as marble intellects floating above common stupidity. Then history catches them in Britain acting like raccoons in formal wear, carving up the chair of the world's most famous playwright because they wanted a fancy historical fridge magnet before fridges existed. 3. Before Abraham Lincoln became the solemn giant of American memory, the face on monuments, textbooks, and motivational posters in classrooms with broken clocks, he was an Illinois politician who could be surprisingly theatrical when things went wrong. In 1840, Lincoln and his allies wanted to block a legislative maneuver they opposed by preventing a quorum. Normal political obstruction, basically. But Lincoln reportedly decided the situation needed more physical comedy and jumped out of a first-floor statehouse window to avoid being counted. Picture that for a second. Future great emancipator, future national martyr, future man carved into a mountain of respect, diving out of a window because parliamentary procedure had become inconvenient. That is the beauty of the story. It smashes the marble statue image and reveals a tall, awkward politician choosing architecture-based escape. Democracy is sometimes speeches and principles. Sometimes it is a man fleeing through a window like the vote is haunted. 4. Al Gore never actually said, "I invented the internet," but politics does not care about accuracy when a phrase is clumsy enough to be turned into a national chew toy. In a 1999 interview, Gore said he took the initiative in creating the internet, meaning he had supported legislation and policy that helped its development. Honestly, that is a defensible claim. Boring, but defensible. Unfortunately, it sounded like he had personally entered a basement, whispered, "Let there be Wi-Fi," and created cyberspace with his bare hands. The line was shortened, twisted, and fossilized into a joke that followed him around like a cursed screensaver. His actual point was reasonable enough to put a room to sleep. His wording was so politically doomed that the country heard it and decided no, this man just claimed he personally gave birth to the internet. Congratulations, Al. You created a meme before memes had stretch marks. 5. George Washington liked the noble image of refusing a presidential salary. It was a beautiful symbol for a young republic terrified that its new leader might start acting like a king, with better dental problems. Washington seemed selfless, restrained, and safely allergic to personal enrichment. Very impressive. But he still expected his official expenses to be covered, and the expenses of looking presidential were not exactly a loaf of bread and one patriotic candle. Hosting, dinners, alcohol, ceremony, travel, entertaining important guests, and all the social theater of national dignity cost real money. So the public got the clean, symbolic gesture, while the government still paid serious bills for the lifestyle required to make the office look grand. Washington was not corrupt. That is not the joke. The joke is that even Republican simplicity came with a tab. Apparently, dignity is expensive, especially when everyone expects Madeira and national greatness in the same room. 6. Benjamin Franklin was a diplomat, inventor, printer, scientist, founder, and apparently the founding father most likely to ruin a serious dinner with one perfect bathroom joke. In a satirical essay, he mocked scholars for wasting their giant brains on useless questions and suggested they focus on something humanity actually needed: a way to make farts smell pleasant. The piece is now popularly known as Fart Proudly, which sounds less like an Enlightenment essay and more like a dare from an uncle who should not be left alone near the punch bowl. But Franklin was not just being gross for sport. He was poking fun at elite intellectual vanity, where pointless research could be dressed up in fancy language while ordinary human comfort got ignored. Still, the image is glorious. One of America's great founders, the man of lightning and reason, basically asked science to invent luxury flatulence. Nation-building had range. 7. John Adams thought the new American presidency needed a grander title, because apparently, Mr. President sounded too ordinary, too humble, and tragically low on a decorative monarchy glitter. He pushed for ceremonial titles with serious royal energy, the kind of phrases that sound like they should be shouted by a nervous servant entering a throne room. This was awkward because America had just fought a revolution to escape exactly that kind of crown-flavored nonsense. The Senate wasted precious time debating what to call the president, while the country was still trying to convince the world it had not overthrown a king just to invent aristocracy with a cheaper logo. Adams's enthusiasm for pomp blew up in his face. Critics mocked him as his rotundity, which is an elite insult because it hits both vanity and waistline in one elegant cannonball. The presidency stayed simple. Adams got roasted like a ceremonial turkey. 8. William Howard Taft getting stuck in a White House bathtub is one of those stories that refuses to die because the mental picture is too cruelly perfect. Taft was a very large man. A gigantic custom bathtub really was installed during his presidency. So America looked at those two facts and immediately built a full cinematic universe where the president became trapped in porcelain like a confused walrus in executive distress. The problem is that historians and archivists have not found solid contemporary evidence that Taft actually got wedged in the tub and had to be rescued. He may have been trapped more by national imagination than bathroom equipment. But that almost makes it funnier. The country loved the image so much that the myth became stronger than reality. Some presidents get remembered for doctrine, war, reform, or scandal. Taft got dragged through history by plumbing fan fiction with excellent visual branding. 9. Ulysses S. Grant carries one of the weirdest law and order stories in presidential folklore. The most dramatic version says he became the only sitting president arrested for speeding after racing a horse-drawn carriage through Washington. Historians are careful with that version because the flashiest details rely heavily on a later recollection, but the safer version is still wonderfully absurd. Grant really did have a reputation for driving his horse teams too fast and getting warned about it. That alone is enough to make the story immortal. This was the Civil War hero, the man trusted to help reunite a broken country, apparently turning into pure golden retriever energy the moment he got hold of the reins. Forget marble statues and solemn portraits. Here is the President of the United States being told to slow down downtown like a teenager in a borrowed carriage. Leadership, but with hoof-based traffic complaints. 10. In January 1992, George Herbert Walker Bush attended a formal state dinner in Japan, sat beside Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa, And then American prestige slipped on a banana peel in front of the entire world. Bush suddenly vomited into the Prime Minister's lap, then slumped over and fainted. This was not a comedy sketch. This was foreign policy turning into live slapstick with table settings. Cameras were there. Dignitaries were there. Horror was definitely there, probably sitting between the salad fork and the diplomatic silence. Japanese television replayed the moment so often that the incident helped inspire a new verb for throwing up. Imagine representing the United States abroad and accidentally becoming a medical emergency, a diplomatic incident, and a national punchline before dessert. Bush recovered quickly, thankfully. The image did not. For one brutal news cycle, the world's superpower looked like it had lost a duel with dinner. 11. Andrew Jackson was given a massive block of cheese weighing about 1,400 pounds, which already sounds less like a respectful gift and more like history setting up a prank with dairy. A normal person might have distributed it quickly, stored it responsibly, or asked one brave intern to make it somebody else's problem. Jackson instead let the giant cheese age in the White House for roughly 2 years. By the time it was finally offered to the public in 1837, the smell was reportedly so foul that it seeped into the drapes, carpets, and possibly the moral fabric of the building. The next administration inherited the odor like a cursed ghost made of milk. Imagine moving into the White House and realizing your first great battle is not with Congress, banks, or foreign powers, but with presidential cheese funk. American statecraft, apparently, sometimes smells like mold and regret. 12. Richard Nixon gave the immortal line, "I am not a crook," in November 1973 while speaking to journalists in Orlando at a conference hosted at Walt Disney World. That location matters because the sentence was supposed to sound grave, firm, presidential, and deeply believable. Instead, history attached it forever to a place associated with cartoon mice, family vacations, and emotionally exhausted parents paying too much for snacks. Watergate had already created the trust crisis. Disney did not do that. But the setting absolutely added a strange layer of accidental comedy, like watching a constitutional emergency unfold next to a souvenir stand. Nixon wanted the country to hear moral seriousness. History heard a president defending his integrity on the wrong set, while the whole administration slowly slid into scandal like a parade float with legal problems. Nothing says, "Trust me," quite like becoming your own theme park quote. 13. When Chester Arthur became president, he looked at the White House interior and apparently decided the nation's executive mansion had the energy of a tired attic with delusions of importance. He refused to move in until renovations were done, and the makeover involved clearing out huge amounts of old furniture, household items, and historic material. Reports described wagon loads of furnishings and barrels of old china being sold off. Some of those pieces were tied to earlier presidencies, which means the White House basically held a clearance sale on its own memory. Arthur wanted elegance, style, and modern polish. Fine. But the image is still brutal. A new president enters the people's most symbolic house, judges it as shabby, and starts liquidating heirlooms like a man preparing for the most aggressive estate sale in constitutional history. Welcome to the presidency. Everything must go. 14. Richard Nixon during Watergate was not exactly radiating calm, stable, trustworthy dad energy. Accounts from the period describe heavy drinking, dark moods, erratic behavior, and late-night scenes that deeply worried people around him. One of the most haunting bits of White House lore says Nixon, drunk and isolated, wandered the halls and talked to portraits of dead presidents while his own presidency collapsed. The drinking is well documented. The portrait conversations live in that blurry territory where memoir, rumor, and political legend all hold hands in a badly lit hallway. But that almost makes the image more disturbing. The United States was in the middle of a constitutional crisis, and the mental picture became less commander-in-chief calmly guiding the nation, and more haunted man arguing with museum decor after closing time. Not exactly the energy you want from the person holding nuclear authority and several glasses. 15. Aaron Burr managed a scandal so ridiculous it still sounds fake, even when every history teacher confirms it with a tired sigh. In 1804, while serving as Vice President of the United States, Burr fought a duel with Alexander Hamilton and killed him. Then, instead of disappearing into the wilderness like a dramatic outlaw with a guilty conscience and excellent cheekbones, Burr returned to Washington and continued presiding over the Senate while under murder indictment in New York and New Jersey. Imagine that workplace dynamic. The sitting vice president has recently shot one of the most famous political figures in the country, and now he is back overseeing parliamentary procedure, like this is just awkward office gossip. Early American politics loved words like honor, virtue, and Republican dignity. Then, every now and then it revealed itself as ego, violence, and powdered wigs pretending to be civilization. 16. In 1979, Jimmy Carter was fishing alone in a small boat in Georgia when a swamp rabbit started swimming toward him and tried to climb aboard. Carter waved it away with a paddle, which is not exactly heroic, but also not unreasonable. If a wet wild rabbit makes a suspiciously determined approach toward your boat, you are allowed to have questions. The actual event was strange enough. Then the press discovered it and inflated the whole thing into the infamous killer rabbit story. Suddenly, the President of the United States was being discussed like he had barely survived an assassination attempt by nature's soggiest plush toy. Carter did not do anything disgraceful. He shooed away an animal, but politically, the image was deadly because it made the presidency look fragile, awkward, and somehow vulnerable to bunny-based chaos. No superpower wants a headline that sounds like it escaped from a children's nightmare. 17. Thomas Jefferson became bizarrely invested in proving that American nature was not weak, stunted, or inferior to Europe's. A French naturalist named Buffon had argued that life in the New World degenerated into smaller, feebler versions of Old World greatness. And Jefferson took that personally. Not mildly personally, presidential level personally. His response was not just a lecture, a report, or a patriotic eye roll. He arranged for the carcass of a giant American moose to be shipped to Paris as evidence, a huge dead moose, across the Atlantic, for national pride. Naturally, the animal did not arrive with the elegance of a scientific exhibit and probably smelled like diplomacy had died in transit. For a while, one of America's most brilliant political thinkers was basically running international moose propaganda. Jefferson wanted Europe to respect American greatness, and apparently the argument needed antlers, hooves, and a terrible odor. 18. Alexander Hamilton faced accusations of financial corruption and responded in the most spectacularly self-destructive Hamilton way imaginable. Instead of simply denying bribery and stepping away from the match, he published the Reynolds pamphlet, a long public document explaining in painful detail that he had not misused public office for money. Good objective. Horrifying method. His defense was basically, no, I was not taking bribes. I was merely having an affair with Maria Reynolds and paying money because her husband was blackmailing me. So he cleared himself of one scandal by opening a trapdoor under his own personal life and inviting the entire country to look inside. America watched one of its sharpest political minds create a deluxe written confession of adultery just to win an argument about accounting. That is not crisis management. That is setting your own house on fire to prove the smoke is not coming from the kitchen. 19. Davy Crockett lost his congressional seat and reportedly handled the defeat with the gentle emotional balance of a cannon rolling downhill. The famous line attributed to him basically told his former voters they could all go to hell while he went to Texas. Whether the exact wording changed over time or not, the spirit is very clear. This was not a gracious concession. No polished respect for the democratic process. No, the people have spoken, and I will listen. Just a frontier-flavored breakup note from a man whose ego had been kicked through a saloon window. It remains one of the most aggressively American political exits ever remembered. Bruised pride, theatrical contempt, and myth-making all riding the same horse. Some politicians leave office with humility. Crockett apparently left like a man slamming the door so hard the whole district heard it. 20. Benjamin Harrison had electricity installed in the White House, which sounds like a proud embrace of modern progress until you learn that the first family treated the light switches like tiny wall-mounted death traps. Harrison and First Lady Caroline Harrison were reportedly so nervous about being shocked that they avoided touching the switches themselves. Staff had to do it, and sometimes lights were simply left burning because nobody in the family wanted to be the one who challenged the invisible lightning. To be fair, electricity was still new and intimidating to many people. Early wiring was not exactly wrapped in the comforting aura of modern safety standards. But the image is still hilarious. The President of the United States living in one of the most important buildings in the country, surrounded by modern technology, quietly losing a psychological duel with a lamp. It is hard to look majestic when your household policy is, please ask someone else to touch the future. 21. William Henry Harrison's 1840 campaign is one of the clearest examples of American politics discovering that branding can beat biography with a club. Harrison was born into privilege and lived in comfort, but his supporters sold him as a humble log cabin, hard cider man of the people. Suddenly, an elite candidate was marketed like a rugged frontier uncle who spent his mornings chopping wood, sipping cider, and solving America's problems with plain-spoken wisdom. It was wildly effective and wildly fake. The real Harrison stood behind the curtain while the campaign handed voters a carefully assembled folk hero with rustic packaging. This was not just campaign spin. This was political cosplay with professional distribution. Democracy has always loved authenticity, especially when it is counterfeit, focus-tested, and polished until it looks homemade. Long before modern campaign consultants discovered flannel shirts and diner photo ops, Harrison's team had already found the cheat code. 22. Thomas Jefferson liked to present himself as a refined philosopher of liberty, reason, and human progress. Then you find moments where he looks less like a marble thinker and more like an agricultural smuggler with excellent handwriting. While in Europe, Jefferson became determined to bring prized Italian rice varieties to America. The problem was that exporting those seed materials was tightly controlled and could bring serious punishment. Jefferson's solution was not a formal agreement, a trade mission, or a polite diplomatic request. He reportedly hid rice grains in his coat pockets and smuggled them out himself. So yes, one of America's most elegant statesmen basically committed pocket-based crop contraband because he wanted better rice cultivation back home. It is exactly the kind of thing Jefferson would call a practical improvement project while technically behaving like a man shoplifting agriculture. Liberty, enlightenment, and suspiciously grainy coat pockets. 23. William Henry Harrison delivered the longest inaugural address in American history in 1841, speaking for nearly 2 hours in awful weather while trying to project rugged strength. The old legend says this macho performance gave him pneumonia and killed him. Modern historians have complicated that neat story, suggesting his fatal illness may have involved typhoid or another disease connected to the White House water system. But the myth survived because it was simply too perfect as political symbolism. A newly elected president tries to look tough, ignores basic comfort, gives a speech long enough to qualify as a public endurance test, and then dies 32 days into office. It is tragic, but it also has the structure of a cautionary tale written by a cruel screenwriter. America wanted a strong opening for a presidency. Instead, it got the historical equivalent of maybe bring a coat and stop talking. 24. One of George Herbert Walker. Bush's most damaging out-of-touch moments came from a 1992 grocery store event where he appeared fascinated by a barcode scanner. The story quickly hardened into a brutal public image. The president was amazed by ordinary supermarket technology because he had apparently spent his life floating above normal people like a polite aristocratic weather balloon. The reality was more complicated. Reports suggest he may have been shown a more advanced scanner than the everyday checkout version, so the famous joke was exaggerated. But politics does not pause for nuance. Nuance gets hit by the campaign bus and left in the parking lot. Once the image landed, Bush looked to millions of voters like a wealthy visitor from another planet discovering groceries. In elections, Embarrassment becomes simplified, weaponized, and stapled to your forehead. The scanner scanned more than barcodes. It scanned his entire image. 25. In 1988, Michael Dukakis wanted to look tough on defense, so his campaign arranged one of the most cursed photo opportunities in modern politics. The theory was simple. Put the candidate in a tank, let the tank do the masculinity, collect the commander-in-chief vibes. Unfortunately, when Dukakis climbed in wearing an oversized helmet, the whole thing collapsed into visual catastrophe. Instead of looking powerful, he looked like a substitute teacher who had been accidentally loaded into military equipment during a field trip. The footage was so ridiculous that it helped define him as weak, which is brutally unfair but extremely politics. You can spend years building policy credentials, then one camera angle turns you into a national joke before memes even have a name. Dukakis tried to borrow authority from a tank and somehow ended up looking smaller than the helmet. That is not campaign messaging. That is visual-friendly fire. 26. Warren Harding absolutely hosted poker games in the White House, which already gives his administration the vibe of a smoky country club that accidentally acquired executive power. The most famous extra detail says he once gambled away valuable White House china. That part is probably legend, and White House historians have pushed back on it. But the story stuck because Harding's reputation made it feel emotionally plausible. His presidency was surrounded by scandal, shady friends, loose behavior, and the general sense that bad decisions were wandering the halls in nice suits. So even if Harding did not literally lose presidential dishes in a card game, the nation was ready to believe he might have, which is almost as damaging. Some rumors survive because they are proven. Others survive because they perfectly match the odor of the room. Harding's White House image was elegance on the outside, poker smoke behind the curtains. 27. Early Congress loved talking about Republican virtue, honor, restraint, and all the elegant words politicians use right before behaving like feral children with job titles. In 1798, Representative Matthew Lyon spat in the face of Representative Roger Griswold during a dispute on the House floor. Astonishingly, this did not create a new era of calm understanding. Griswold attacked Lyon with a wooden cane, and Lyon defended himself with fireplace tongs. So yes, one of the young republic's early congressional confrontations looked less like the birth of constitutional government and more like a tavern fight inside a furniture storage room. The United States was barely out of its founding era, and already lawmakers were trying to beat each other with household objects in the national legislature. Imagine explaining that to foreign observers. Our republic is stable, our institutions are strong, and please ignore the elected men dueling with chimney equipment. 28. Strom. Thurman's 1957 filibuster against civil rights legislation lasted more than 24 hours, which is already a grotesque monument to political obstruction. He prepared obsessively, trying to control his body long enough to keep talking and delay the bill. Over the years, Capitol lore added extra details about how he handled the bathroom problem, and those details became almost as infamous as the speech itself. Whether every whispered version is fully accurate or not, the core picture is shameful enough. A United States senator spent an entire day and night talking without pause in an effort to block civil rights progress. This was not noble debate. It was endurance theater in defense of segregation, dressed up as procedure because politics loves putting ugly things in formal clothing. Some moments make government look inspiring. This one made the Senate look like a very expensive room where justice went to be stalled by a man with a stopwatch and no shame. 29. Andrew Jackson's funeral was already destined to have strange energy, because even death was not going to make the Jackson era suddenly develop indoor manners. Then comes the famous story that his pet parrot had learned so much profanity from the former president that it began cursing aggressively during the funeral and had to be removed. Is the story perfectly documented? Not really. It comes from a later recollection, so historians treat it with caution. But the reason it survived is obvious. It feels absurdly believable. Jackson turned American politics into a bare-knuckle spectator sport. So of course the most on-brand final tribute might be a foul-mouthed bird screaming chaos in front of mourners. Even if partly legendary, it is one of the most believable, ridiculous stories ever attached to a president. Some leaders leave behind libraries. Jackson allegedly left behind a parrot with the vocabulary of a political knife fight. 30. John Quincy. Adams loved swimming in the Potomac, often very early in the morning, and one famous Washington story claims he sometimes did it naked. Then, the legend becomes almost too perfect. Journalist Anne Royal supposedly found his clothes on the riverbank, sat on them, and refused to move until the president agreed to give her an interview while standing neck-deep in the water. Historians argue over how much of this actually happened and how much is polished Capitol gossip. But the story survived because it is politically flawless. It turns the presidency from a solemn marble institution into a cartoon scene. A trapped president, a fearless reporter, stolen clothing, and the Potomac River serving as both witness and negotiation room. Even the possibility tells you early Washington had a very different flavor of chaos. Modern politicians fear hidden microphones. John Quincy Adams allegedly had to fear journalists sitting on his pants. 31. Andrew Johnson showed up to his own vice presidential inauguration in 1865 after trying to treat illness with whiskey, which is one of those historical openings that already sounds like a disaster walking toward a podium. He was visibly drunk, rambling, and painfully off-script. Instead of giving a crisp ceremonial address, Johnson stumbled through an awkward performance that embarrassed allies, alarmed observers, and made the incoming administration look unstable before it had properly begun. Abraham Lincoln had to stand there and absorb the public cringe in real time, which feels unfair even by Civil War standards. It is one thing for a politician to privately overindulge. It is another to do it on one of the most visible constitutional stages in the country and turn a national ritual into a public warning label. America was trying to project seriousness near the end of the Civil War. Johnson arrived with chaos in formal clothing and whiskey fumes in the Constitution. 32. Lyndon Johnson did not believe the presidency should pause for dignity, privacy, or the basic human kindness of not making other people talk to you in a bathroom. If he wanted a briefing, he got a briefing, even while sitting on the toilet with the door open, as if the Oval Office had suddenly annexed the least sacred tiled room in Washington. Aides, lawmakers, and officials were expected to continue the conversation while the President of the United States conducted business from the throne in the worst possible sense. Johnson treated awkwardness like an enemy nation and simply invaded it. On one level, this showed how aggressively he dominated every room and every person in it. On another level, it made the most powerful office on earth feel like a hostage negotiation in a bathroom stall. Some presidents used fireside chats. Johnson apparently preferred plumbing-side briefings. American power, but make everyone deeply uncomfortable. So now I want names, not vague complaints. Actual political disasters. Which American politician did we leave out who absolutely deserved a spot in this hall of national secondhand embarrassment? Drop the name and the humiliating moment in the comments. And if someone tries to defend the indefensible, even better. Like the video if at least one of these made you question the survival of the Republic, and subscribe for more history that sounds fake but somehow had paperwork.